So I was just listening to an episode of Freakonomics, which is a podcast about economics, and they had a really interesting episode about corporate ESGs, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. And most people, I think, when they think of ESGs, really just care about the environmental piece of it more so than the social and the governance piece. And so um, this episode was talking about how in like 5 years or something, like there's going to be a third of all of the money that's invested in the world in these ESGs. So that's pretty big. And they were talking with this Yale economist, Kelly Shue, who is talking about how she thinks that the ESG movement is really fundamentally misguided because they categorize companies into green and brown companies. So, the green companies being the ones that are better for the environment and do not emit as much carbon and pollution. And the brown companies are the ones that emit the most carbon pollution, and there's sort of neutral companies in the middle. And so what ESGs try to do is they try to direct global investment dollars towards these green companies and away from the brown companies. And the reason why she says that that strategy is misguided is because they are those companies that are the green companies are typically service oriented companies to begin with, like banks, and so they're not the ones who are emitting that much carbon in the first place. So if your goal is to actually have there be less carbon in the atmosphere, her stance is that you should actually direct more money towards the brown companies, because when they have less capital available to them, they tend to be much more short-term oriented, which means that they're actually going to pollute more because polluting is cheaper. And allowing them more access to capital actually gives them the money they need to invest in producing less carbon emissions in the long run. And so her argument is that even if you're saving like 1% of carbon in one of these brown companies, that's so much more because there's like 5 companies or something that produce like 80%. I'm just making the number up, but it's a huge percentage of the world's carbon emissions. And so basically, she's just saying, like, look, you're just kneecapping these companies that are actually producing the most pollution, and they're not going away, right? It would potentially work if they completely cease to exist, but they're in sectors that are fundamental for the economy. They're things like transportation companies or energy companies or agriculture companies, and it's not like the economy is going to just stop consuming transportation or agriculture, so we would be much better off trying to improve those companies in terms of their environmental impact than just trying to make it less financially viable for them to limit their emissions. And so I'm really curious if you are an economist or an environmentalist, or if you know someone who might have some expertise in this. Like, I'm not an economist, so I don't really understand whether or not it sounds like a very reasonable argument, but I'm very curious as to what you think about whether Kelly Shue is right that this is the strategy we should take, because it seems to be a very unpopular opinion within the economist world.